"You can't evict us. We have squatters' rights," my golden entitled sister screamed. She didn't know I sold the property to the state for a highway expansion. The sheriff didn't evict them. The demolition crew did. Hey, Reddit. So my entitled sister tried to claim squatters' rights on a property I owned, screaming about how I couldn't evict her. What she didn't know was that I'd already sold the whole thing to the state for a highway expansion project. The sheriff didn't evict them. The demolition crew did. Buckle up, because this story is exactly as satisfying as it sounds. I'm Jake, 32 male, and I've got a younger sister named Rebecca, 28 female, who's been the golden child since the day she was born. I'm talking the kind of favoritism that would make a reality TV producer jealous. Everything she wanted, she got. Every mistake she made got swept under the rug. Meanwhile, I was expected to be the responsible one, the backup plan, the family safety net. And like an idiot, I played that role for way too long. Let me paint you a picture of how our childhood went. When Rebecca was 16 and crashed Dad's car joyriding with her friends, my parents paid for all the repairs and told her to be more careful next time. When I was 16 and accidentally scratched Mom's car in the driveway while learning to parallel park, I had to work the entire summer at minimum wage to pay for the repair. Rebecca got a brand new laptop for getting a C+ average in high school. I got a used calculator for making honor roll. The double standards were so thick you could cut them with a knife. The pattern started early too. I remember being 10 years old and saving my allowance for 3 months to buy this remote control car I wanted. The day I finally had enough money, Rebecca threw a tantrum in the store because she wanted a dollhouse that cost twice as much. Mom and Dad bought it for her right there. No questions asked. Meanwhile, they made me wait another week to make sure I really wanted the car and wasn't being impulsive. I was 10 and had literally saved for 90 days, but sure, let's question my decision-making. When we were teenagers, I had a strict curfew of 10 p.m. on weekends. Rebecca's curfew was midnight, even though she was younger. When I asked why, Dad said it was because boys needed more discipline. When Rebecca started missing her curfew regularly, sometimes rolling in at 2 or 3 a.m., nothing happened. She'd get a lecture, and that was it. The one time I came home at 10:15 because my friend's car broke down, I was grounded for a month. I had to get a job at 15 to pay for my own clothes, gas money, and anything beyond basic necessities. Rebecca didn't get her first job until she was 19, and that lasted all of 3 weeks before she quit because her manager was mean to her. By mean, I later found out the manager had asked her to actually work instead of being on her phone. My parents sympathized with her and said some bosses were just impossible to work with. This pattern continued straight into adulthood. Rebecca bounced from job to job, boyfriend to boyfriend, apartment to apartment, and every single time she screwed up, Mom and Dad were right there to bail her out. Meanwhile, I put myself through community college while working full-time, saved every penny, and built an actual life for myself. Did I get any recognition for that? Nope. Just more expectations that I'd be there to help Rebecca whenever she needed it. By the time I was 25, I'd already lent Rebecca over $3,000 total for various emergencies that were never actually emergencies. A security deposit she needed back when she claimed the landlord was being unfair. Utility bills she couldn't pay because she'd spent her paycheck on concert tickets. First and last month's rent for an apartment she swore she could afford but couldn't. I never saw a penny of it back. Every time I brought it up, Mom would say that family doesn't keep score and I was being petty about money. About 8 years ago, my grandmother on my dad's side passed away. She left behind this old house about 45 minutes outside the city in a small rural town. The place was nothing fancy. Built in the 1960s, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, needed some serious updates. But it was paid off, sitting on about an acre of land, and Grandma left it specifically to me in her will. Not to Dad, not split between Rebecca and me, just me. Grandma and I had always been close. She was the only person in my family who seemed to see the favoritism for what it was and actually called it out. When I was a kid and my parents would brush off my accomplishments while celebrating Rebecca's mediocrity, Grandma would pull me aside and tell me she was proud of me. She'd slip me $20 here and there with a wink, telling me to save it for something special. While my parents were busy managing Rebecca's latest crisis, Grandma was asking me about my life, my goals, my dreams. I visited her every other weekend for years. We'd sit on her back porch drinking sweet tea while she told stories about growing up during harder times. She taught me how to fix things around the house, basic carpentry, plumbing, electrical work. Said a man should know how to take care of his own property. She wasn't trying to be sexist about it. She just came from a generation where those skills mattered, and she wanted to pass them on. Rebecca visited Grandma maybe twice a year, usually on holidays when she couldn't avoid it, and always left early because she was bored. Grandma never said anything about it, but I could see the disappointment in her eyes. She'd ask about Rebecca sometimes, and I'd make excuses. Oh, she's just busy with work. She's going through a breakup. She's dealing with a lot right now. Grandma would just nod and change the subject. When Grandma got sick in her final year, I was the one who drove her to doctor's appointments. I was the one who made sure she had groceries. I was the one who sat with her in the hospital during her last weeks. Rebecca showed up for maybe 3 hours total during that entire time, spent most of it on her phone, and left because hospitals made her uncomfortable. I still remember the lawyer reading that part of the will. My parents looked shocked. Rebecca looked pissed. But Grandma had been crystal clear in her wishes. She'd seen the favoritism over the years, and in her quiet way, this was her attempt to balance the scales. She knew I was the one who actually visited her regularly, who helped her with yard work, who called just to chat. Rebecca visited maybe twice a year, usually when she needed money. The will included a letter addressed to me. Grandma wrote that she knew my parents had always favored Rebecca, and while she loved both her grandchildren, she wanted to make sure I knew that someone saw my efforts and appreciated them. The house was her way of giving me something that was just mine, something Rebecca couldn't claim or my parents couldn't pressure me to share. She wrote that she hoped it would give me security and a foundation to build my life on. I cried reading that letter. It was the first time anyone in my family had actually acknowledged the imbalance, had validated what I'd felt my entire life. Grandma saw it. She'd always seen it. And in her final act, she'd tried to correct it. The house wasn't in great shape when I inherited it. Grandma had been elderly and unable to keep up with maintenance for her last few years. The roof needed work, the plumbing was questionable, and the whole place had that musty smell old houses get. But I saw potential. Over the next 2 years, I spent my weekends fixing it up. New roof, updated bathroom, refinished the hardwood floors that were hiding under old carpet, fresh paint throughout. I did most of the work myself, YouTube teaching me everything from drywall repair to basic plumbing. Those renovation weekends became my therapy. After dealing with corporate nonsense all week and fielding the occasional crisis call from Rebecca or my parents about whatever she'd screwed up now, I could drive out to the house and just work. There was something satisfying about taking something broken and making it functional again. Every wall I painted, every fixture I replaced, I was putting a piece of myself into the property. I replaced all the old single-pane windows with double-pane energy-efficient ones. Upgraded the electrical panel because the old one was a fire hazard waiting to happen. Tore out the ancient kitchen countertops and installed new ones. Replaced the water heater that was probably older than I was. Fixed the sagging front porch and reinforced the foundation in a couple spots where it had started to crack. The whole process cost me about $30,000 in materials and a few contractor jobs I couldn't handle myself, like the electrical panel and some of the roof work. But I was meticulous about it. Every receipt saved, every expense documented. This was my investment, my future, and I treated it that way. By the time I finished, the house looked completely different. Still had that classic 1960s ranch charm, but everything was updated and functional. New stainless appliances in the kitchen, renovated bathroom with modern fixtures, fresh paint throughout in neutral colors, refinished hardwood floors that gleamed. The place was move-in ready, and actually quite nice for its size. I thought about selling it once I finished the renovations, but the real estate market was weird at the time. Plus, the property value in that area was steadily climbing as the city expanded outward. So I decided to hold on to it as an investment. I rented it out to a nice retired couple for a few years. They took good care of the place, paid on time, never caused issues. It was generating decent passive income, and the property was appreciating. Everything was working out perfectly. The retired couple, George and Linda, were ideal tenants. They treated the place like their own, which made sense since they'd sold their bigger house after their kids grew up and wanted something smaller to maintain. They even did minor repairs themselves without bothering me about it. Garden looked great because Linda loved planting flowers. George kept the gutters clean and the lawn mowed. I barely had to think about the property except to deposit the rent check every month. I'd drive by occasionally just to make sure everything looked good. George would wave from the yard. We'd chat for a few minutes about how things were going. Linda would sometimes have fresh cookies or pie she'd insist I take home. It was the kind of landlord-tenant relationship that made property ownership seem easy. Then, about 3 years ago, my tenants decided to move to Florida to be closer to their grandkids. They gave me proper notice, left the place spotless, and that was that. Linda even wrote me a thank you note for being a good landlord, which nobody does anymore. I started the process of finding new tenants, but before I could even list the property, Rebecca showed up at my apartment. She'd just broken up with her boyfriend of 2 years. Apparently, he'd cheated on her, which sucked. I'll admit that. But Rebecca's solution to every problem was to make it everyone else's problem. She was living in his apartment, and now she needed somewhere to stay. Could she crash at my place for a few weeks while she figured things out? I said no. My apartment was a one-bedroom, I valued my privacy, and I knew Rebecca's few weeks would turn into months. She threw a fit right there in my living room, crying about how I was her brother and how could I turn my back on family. The whole performance would have won her an Oscar if guilt-tripping was a category. Then she switched tactics. What about Grandma's old house? It was sitting empty anyway, right? She could stay there temporarily, just until she got back on her feet. She'd even help me find a real tenant once she moved out. She promised it would only be for a month or two, max. I should have said no. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to say no. But then Mom called. Then Dad called. They both laid on the guilt thick. Rebecca was going through such a hard time. The breakup was devastating. She just needed a little help from her big brother. Wasn't that what family did for each other? I'd have a whole empty house, and I was going to let my own sister be homeless? The homeless angle was complete garbage, by the way. Mom and Dad had a spare bedroom. They just didn't want Rebecca staying with them and disrupting their lives. But they had no problem volunteering my property. Against my better judgment, I agreed. But I made it crystal clear to Rebecca that this was temporary. 1 month, 2 at the absolute maximum. She had to actively look for her own place and a stable job. She couldn't just camp out indefinitely. She swore up and down that she understood, gave me a huge hug, and moved in the next weekend. The first month was fine. She'd send me occasional texts about how grateful she was, how the house was perfect, how she was applying for jobs. I felt good about helping her out. See? I could be a supportive brother when she actually needed it. Month 2 rolled around. I checked in with her about her apartment search. She said she was still looking but hadn't found anything in her price range yet. The job search was slow too. Okay, I could be patient. The market was tough. Month 3. Same excuses. She'd seen some places, but they weren't quite right. She had a few job interviews, but nothing had panned out. She needed just a little more time. When I pressed her on specifics, like which apartments she'd looked at or what companies she'd interviewed with, she got vague. Oh, she couldn't remember the exact addresses. The company names weren't important since they didn't work out. Classic deflection tactics I'd seen my whole life. Month 4. I started getting firmer with her. The temporary arrangement was turning permanent, and I wanted my property available for actual paying tenants. She got defensive, saying I was being heartless and putting money before family, that I was trying to kick her out when she was still vulnerable. She'd cry on the phone, making me feel guilty for even bringing it up. Mom called to tell me I was stressing Rebecca out and she needed support, not pressure. Month 5. I told Rebecca I needed a concrete timeline. When exactly was she planning to move out? She said she'd found a promising job lead and just needed to see if it panned out, maybe another month or two. I reluctantly agreed but said that was the absolute deadline. She promised she understood. Month 6. The job lead had supposedly fallen through. She was back to square one. But she'd started seeing someone new, Kyle, and he was helping her get her life together. Things were really looking up. She just needed a little more time to save money from the new job she'd just started. Wait, I thought the job fell through. Oh, she got a different job. Working retail part-time. It didn't pay much, but it was something. I should have driven out there sooner. Should have done surprise inspections. Should have been smarter. But I was busy with my own life, my own job, and I naively thought Rebecca was at least being honest about living there alone. Month 6, day 15. I drove out to the property unannounced to have a face-to-face conversation about this. What I found made my blood boil. Rebecca wasn't alone. She'd moved her new boyfriend in, some dude named Kyle who looked like he'd never held a job in his life. They were living in my house, rent-free, like it was their own personal love nest. The evidence was everywhere. Men's shoes by the door that definitely weren't Rebecca's. A gaming setup in the living room that took up half the space. Kyle's clothes in the bedroom closet. The second bedroom that I'd specifically told Rebecca to keep clean for potential showings was now his personal gym with weights and equipment scattered around. They'd even put up some tacky posters on the walls without asking, leaving nail holes I'd have to repair. Kyle answered the door when I knocked. Just stood there in gym shorts and a tank top, looking at me like I was interrupting his day. Didn't even know who I was at first. When I said I was Rebecca's brother and the property owner, his expression shifted to this cocky smirk. Oh, the landlord. Rebecca had told him about me. I lost it. I told Rebecca she had 2 weeks to get out. She'd completely violated our agreement. She was supposed to be staying there temporarily by herself, not running a free hotel for her and her deadbeat boyfriend. The whole thing was over. Rebecca went nuclear. She screamed that I was a terrible brother, that I never actually cared about her, that I was just waiting for an excuse to throw her out. Kyle, showing the intelligence of a brick, chimed in that I needed to calm down and stop disrespecting his girlfriend in their home. Their home. I almost laughed at the audacity. I left that day and immediately sent Rebecca a formal eviction notice via certified mail. 30 days to vacate the property. I copied my parents on the email too, so they couldn't claim they didn't know what was happening. That's when things got really ugly. Mom called me in tears, begging me to reconsider. Rebecca was finally happy with Kyle. They were building a life together. Why did I have to ruin it? Dad took a harsher approach, saying I was being selfish and that Grandma would be ashamed of me for treating family this way. That last comment actually made me laugh. Grandma left me the house specifically because she knew what Rebecca was like. I explained to both of them that Rebecca had violated every single boundary we'd agreed to. It was supposed to be temporary. It was supposed to be just her. She was supposed to be actively looking for her own place. She'd broken all 3 conditions, but they didn't want to hear it. In their eyes, I was the bad guy for enforcing basic expectations. Rebecca ignored the eviction notice completely. Day 30 came and went. She was still there. I sent a second notice. She ignored that too. When I called her directly, she told me she'd talked to Kyle's cousin who knew about law stuff, and apparently she had squatter's rights now since she'd been living there for more than 6 months. I couldn't just evict her. She had legal protections. The smugness in her voice when she said that made my blood pressure spike. She actually thought she'd won, found a loophole that would let her keep living in my house indefinitely. Kyle's cousin, who I later found out had a single semester of community college law classes before dropping out, had given her just enough bad information to make her dangerous. I hung up and immediately called a real estate attorney to figure out what my options were. The news wasn't great. Rebecca was technically right. After 6 months of continuous residence, even without a formal lease or paying rent, the eviction process got complicated. I'd have to file formal paperwork with the court, wait for a hearing date, prove she was there without permission, and even then, the whole process could take months. And if she fought it, which she definitely would, it could drag on even longer. The attorney quoted me around $5,000 just to start the legal proceedings, with no guarantee of how long it would take or what additional costs might pop up. Court fees, filing fees, potential appeals if Rebecca wanted to be extra difficult. And here's the really fun part, he told me. Even if I won the eviction case, I'd have to wait for the sheriff to schedule a physical removal, which could take weeks or months depending on their backlog. I was looking at potentially tens of thousands in legal fees and 6 months to a year of this mess, all while Rebecca and Kyle lived rent-free in my house. And that wasn't even considering the damage they might cause out of spite. The attorney had horror stories. Tenants who trashed properties before leaving, people who punched holes in walls, destroyed appliances, ripped out fixtures just to be vindictive. Even if I won the eviction and got them out, I could be looking at tens of thousands more in repairs. I was furious, not just at Rebecca, but at myself for being stupid enough to let this happen. I'd handed her the keys to my property out of guilt and family obligation, and she'd turned around and weaponized it against me. I spent the next few days researching my options. The more I looked into the eviction process, the worse it seemed. Horror stories of landlords spending years trying to remove squatters. Cases where people caused thousands in property damage out of spite. Legal battles that cost more than the property was worth. I was staring down a nightmare scenario with no good exit. I found online forums full of landlords going through similar situations. One guy had been fighting to evict a non-paying tenant for 3 years. 3 years. Another woman had spent over $40,000 in legal fees and still didn't have her property back. The system was completely broken, designed to protect tenants at all costs, even when those tenants were clearly in the wrong. Rebecca knew this too. She'd done just enough research to understand that the law was on her side, or at least made things difficult enough for me that I might just give up. She was counting on me either accepting her terrible $400 a month offer or just letting her live there indefinitely because fighting it was too expensive and time-consuming. I consulted with 2 more attorneys just to get different perspectives. They all said essentially the same thing. Long process, expensive, no guarantees. One of them even suggested I consider just selling the property as is with Rebecca in it, taking a huge loss and letting it be the buyer's problem. That's how hopeless the situation was. For about a week, I was genuinely depressed about the whole thing. I'd worked so hard on that house, put so much time, money, and effort into making it nice. And Rebecca had taken it from me as easily as she'd taken everything else in our lives. The golden child wins again. Then I caught a break. Pure coincidence, but the timing couldn't have been better. I was at the county planning office pulling permits for a completely unrelated project when I overheard a conversation between two guys in suits. They were discussing a new highway expansion project that had just been approved. The state was buying up properties along a specific corridor to widen the highway and reduce traffic congestion. They were offering fair market value, sometimes even above market, to avoid lengthy legal battles. Something clicked in my brain. I pulled out my phone and looked up the proposed route. My stomach dropped and then immediately soared. The planned expansion ran right through where Grandma's house sat. I spent the next 3 hours in that office gathering every piece of public information I could find about the highway project, the timeline, the compensation structure, the properties affected, everything. The project had been in planning for 2 years apparently, but had just gotten final approval from the state legislature. They were on an aggressive timeline to start construction within 18 months. The state was acquiring about 40 properties total along the route. Most of the landowners were either commercial properties or people who'd already been notified and were in negotiations. My property was one of the last residential parcels they needed to finalize the route. I read through every document I could find: environmental impact studies, traffic flow projections, budget allocations. The state had $50 million earmarked for land acquisition, and they were motivated to move fast. Every month of delay cost them money and political capital. Then I reached out to the state's Department of Transportation and requested information about selling my property. I filled out the preliminary interest form online that same day. Within 24 hours, I got a call back from their acquisition specialist. They were thrilled to hear from me. Most property owners along the route were fighting the expansion, the specialist told me, filing complaints, trying to get more money, hiring lawyers to slow down the process, organizing community resistance groups. Here I was, practically gift-wrapping my property and handing it over. I was their dream seller. They sent an assessor out within a week. The guy showed up in a state vehicle with a clipboard and measuring tools, walked the entire property, took photos, measured everything, checked the condition of the house. I'd kept all my renovation receipts, which helped establish the property's value. The assessor was impressed with the quality of work I'd done. He spent about 3 hours there total, checked the roof, the foundation, the updated electrical and plumbing, looked at the comparable sales in the area, took note of the land size and location. The whole time I was sweating, thinking Rebecca might show up or call, but she didn't. She had no idea what was happening. The best part? Rebecca had no idea any of this was happening. She was so confident in her squatter's rights that she'd stopped even pretending to look for another place. She and Kyle had fully settled in, posting pictures on social media of them fixing up the garden and painting one of the bedrooms, acting like they owned the place. I checked her social media after the assessor left. She'd posted a photo that morning of Kyle mowing the lawn with the caption, "Sunday vibes at our place." Our place. The audacity was unreal. Comments from her friends about how cute the house was, how happy she looked, how Kyle was such a catch for helping her get settled. She was living in a complete fantasy world. The state offered me $340,000 for the property 2 weeks later. The house itself wasn't worth that much, maybe $180,000 on a good day, but the land was valuable for their project, positioned right where they needed to widen the highway and add an additional lane. They were motivated to close quickly and avoid any delays. I'd put maybe $30,000 into renovations over the years, and the property had been free from Grandma. This was a massive windfall. I accepted their offer immediately. We moved into contract negotiations, and I made sure everything was airtight. The state would handle all notifications to current occupants. I wouldn't have to do anything except sign the papers and cash the check. They had their own legal team and process for dealing with people who refused to leave. This wasn't a regular eviction. This was eminent domain. Their lawyer explained the process to me. Once we closed, they'd send notice to any occupants giving them 30 days to vacate. If the occupants refused, the state had the authority to remove them immediately as trespassers on government property. No lengthy court battles, no waiting for sheriff availability, no squatters' rights defense. The state had the power of eminent domain, and that trumped everything else. The closing was scheduled for 6 weeks out. I didn't tell Rebecca. I didn't tell my parents. I just waited and watched Rebecca continue to post happy photos from my house that she thought she'd successfully stolen from me. During those 6 weeks, Rebecca's social media activity ramped up. She and Kyle were really making themselves at home. They bought a new couch for the living room. Kyle installed some shelving in the garage for his tools. Rebecca planted flowers in the front yard and posted about how she'd always wanted a garden of her own. Every post made me more certain I was doing the right thing. She even had the nerve to post a photo tour of the house, showing off the renovations I'd done. "So grateful to have found this perfect place," the caption read. "Not grateful my brother is letting me stay here temporarily. Just grateful she found it, like it had appeared out of thin air for her benefit." About 3 weeks before closing, Rebecca called me out of the blue. She wanted to have a mature conversation about the situation. She and Kyle had been thinking, and they realized they'd been unfair to me. They wanted to work out a deal where they'd start paying me rent. Maybe $400 a month? That was generous, right? They were family after all. $400 a month for a 2-bedroom house on an acre of land that I'd spent $30,000 renovating. The going rate for a rental like that in the area was at least $1,500. But she thought $400 was generous because we were family. The same family logic that got her into the house rent-free in the first place. I played it cool, told her I'd think about it and get back to her. She seemed pleased with that response, probably thinking she'd successfully negotiated her way into staying permanently for basically nothing. Kyle even got on the phone to thank me for being reasonable and understanding their situation. I wanted to laugh but kept my voice neutral. 2 weeks before closing, the state sent their formal notification letter to the property. It was a standard form letter explaining that the property had been identified for acquisition as part of a state highway expansion project, and that current occupants should prepare to vacate within 30 days of sale completion. Rebecca called me screaming within an hour of getting that letter. What the heck was this? The state was trying to take the house? Why hadn't I told her? She and Kyle had rights. They'd established residency. They couldn't just be thrown out. This was illegal. She was going to fight it. I played dumb. Said I'd gotten a similar letter but didn't think much of it. These things happened all the time, right? Government probably just wanted to survey the area or something. They sent these letters to everyone. I'm sure it would blow over. Nothing to worry about. Just some bureaucratic nonsense. Rebecca seemed somewhat reassured by my casual attitude. She said she'd done some research and found out that eminent domain cases could take years to resolve if the occupants fought back. Kyle's cousin had also told her that they could potentially claim compensation as displaced residents. She was already planning her strategy to delay and extract money from the state. I told her, sure, that sounds like it might work. Good luck with that. Kept my tone supportive and unconcerned. She thanked me for not freaking out about it and said she'd keep me updated on how the fight went. I said, great, sounds good, and hung up. Rebecca went all in on her resistance campaign. She joined Facebook groups for property rights activists and started posting daily about her fight against government overreach. Long rants about how the state couldn't just steal people's homes, how she and Kyle were going to stand their ground and weren't going anywhere. The comments were full of keyboard warriors telling her how brave she was, that eminent domain was unconstitutional, that she could probably get a huge settlement if she fought hard enough. The best part was watching her build this whole narrative, where she was the homeowner, being victimized by the government. She never mentioned once in any of her posts that the house wasn't actually hers. Talked about it like she'd bought it herself, like she was protecting her property from being seized. Everyone commenting had no idea she was a squatter who'd been living rent-free for 8 months after refusing to leave when asked. Kyle started posting too. Tough guy videos about how nobody was going to kick him out of his home, how they'd have to carry him out, how he knew his rights. The comments were split between people cheering him on and people trying to explain that eminent domain cases were basically impossible to win once the sale was final. Rebecca and Kyle only paid attention to the cheerleaders. She even started an online fundraiser, posted about needing money to hire a lawyer to fight the unjust taking of her home, raised almost $500 from sympathetic strangers who thought they were helping a homeowner in distress. She used that money to pay for consultations with lawyers who all told her the same thing. If the state completed the purchase, she had no case. But Rebecca didn't want to hear that. She kept shopping around until she found some sketchy guy who said he could delay the process for a few months for a $2,000 retainer. She started another fundraiser to pay him. 1 week before closing, I got a call from the state's legal team. Rebecca and Kyle had apparently sent them a letter claiming they were the rightful occupants of the property and had legal standing to contest the sale. The letter cited squatters' rights, adverse possession, and a bunch of other legal concepts that Kyle's dropout cousin had probably found on some sketchy website. The state attorney actually laughed when he told me this. He said they dealt with this kind of thing constantly, and it wouldn't slow down anything. They had the authority to remove unauthorized occupants as part of the acquisition process. The letter had actually helped them, because Rebecca had put in writing that she was living there without my permission, which made the trespassing case even easier. He asked if I wanted to press criminal trespassing charges against them after the sale closed. I thought about it but decided against it. Getting them removed was enough. I didn't need to pile on criminal charges. Though part of me was tempted. During that final week, Rebecca's Facebook Live videos from the house got more frequent. She was doing daily updates on her fight against the government. The videos were painful to watch. Her talking about how much she loved the house, how she'd made it a home, how unfair it was that the state could just take it away. Comments flooded in with support and terrible legal advice. 3 days before closing, Rebecca tried one last play. She called Mom crying, saying I needed to do something to stop the sale, that I had to refuse to sell to the state, that we needed to work this out as a family. Mom called me within 10 minutes asking what was going on. I explained the whole timeline. The 8 months rent-free, the boyfriend moving in, the eviction notices being ignored, the squatter's rights claim, and now the state highway project. Mom tried the guilt trip about how I should refuse to sell, let Rebecca stay, be compassionate. I reminded her that I'd tried working things out and Rebecca had claimed legal ownership of my property. This was the consequence of that choice. Mom said I was being heartless. I said I was being practical. She hung up on me. Dad didn't even call. Just sent a text saying I was a disappointment and that Grandma would be ashamed. I replied that Grandma left me the house specifically to protect it from this kind of situation, then blocked his number. I was done justifying myself to people who'd never supported me anyway. The closing happened on a Tuesday morning at 9 a.m. I signed about 40 pieces of paper, shook hands with some state officials, and walked out with a check for $340,000. The property was officially theirs. Rebecca and Kyle were now trespassing on state property. I drove home, deposited the check on my phone, and waited. The state had told me they'd be sending their removal crew within 48 hours. They moved fast on these projects. Rebecca called me that evening. She was crying. Some official-looking people had showed up at the house with paperwork saying she and Kyle had to leave immediately. The property had been sold. They were trespassing. When she tried to argue about squatters' rights, the state official apparently told her that squatters' rights don't apply to government property acquisitions, and if they weren't out in 24 hours, they'd be forcibly removed. She begged me to do something, to call someone, to fix this. How could I let this happen to her? I told her the truth. I'd sold the property to the state weeks ago. The sale was final and closed. There was nothing I could do even if I wanted to, which I didn't. She'd had multiple chances to leave voluntarily, and instead, she'd chosen to dig in and claim she had rights to my property. Well, now she got to deal with the consequences of that choice. The screaming that followed was impressive. I was a terrible brother. I was vindictive and cruel. I'd made her homeless. How could I do this to family? Kyle grabbed the phone at one point and threatened to sue me for everything I had. I almost felt bad for how delusional they both were. I told Rebecca she had 24 hours to get her stuff out before the state removed it for her, and then I hung up. I blocked both their numbers. I'd heard enough. My parents called next. They'd heard from Rebecca that I'd sold the house out from under her. How could I be so heartless? She was my sister. I explained calmly that I'd tried to evict her legally, and she'd refused to leave, claiming squatters' rights. So I'd found another solution. The state wanted the property, and I wanted Rebecca gone. It worked out perfectly. Dad said I was dead to him. Mom said she was ashamed to have raised such a selfish son. I told them they'd raised Rebecca to believe she was entitled to whatever she wanted without consequences. And this was her finally meeting reality. Then I hung up on them too. The next day, I drove out to the property. I parked down the road where I could see the house, but stay out of the way. Around 2 p.m., a convoy of vehicles showed up. State officials, a sheriff's deputy, and a moving truck. Rebecca and Kyle had apparently packed up some stuff, but not everything. The moving crew went in and started bringing out the rest of their belongings, piling it on the lawn. Rebecca was there screaming at everyone, filming on her phone, threatening lawsuits. Kyle was arguing with the sheriff's deputy about their rights. The deputy was not impressed. He told them they had 1 hour to get their stuff and leave, or they'd be arrested for trespassing. They loaded up their beat-up sedan with whatever they could fit and drove off, Rebecca still screaming at me even though I was too far away for her to see. The state crew went in and started boarding up the windows and putting notices on the doors. The property was officially off limits. 2 weeks later, the demolition started. I didn't watch that part, but I saw the photos online in a local news article about the highway expansion. The house was gone, replaced by surveying equipment and construction barriers. Rebecca tried to reach out to me through other family members over the next few months. She and Kyle had moved in with his parents, which apparently was going terribly. She wanted to apologize and repair our relationship. I never responded. My parents eventually came around after about 6 months. They admitted maybe they'd enabled Rebecca too much, and maybe I'd been put in an impossible situation, but they still thought I'd handled it too harshly. I reminded them that I'd given her 8 months total and multiple eviction notices. They stopped bringing it up after that. I used the $340,000 to pay off my student loans completely, put a down payment on a nice condo in the city, and invested a chunk in retirement accounts. The financial breathing room changed everything about my life. Rebecca is still with Kyle, apparently. They got engaged according to Mom. I haven't seen her in almost 3 years. We're not in contact. The highway expansion finished last year. I drove by once out of curiosity. Where Grandma's house used to sit is now the fast lane of a 4-lane highway. There's nothing left of the property except asphalt and lane markers. Rebecca tells people I sold the family home out of spite. She leaves out the parts about moving in her boyfriend, claiming squatters' rights, and refusing to leave for months. That's fine. She can tell whatever story she wants. I've got $340,000 in my bank account and zero regrets about how it played out. The state needed the property for a highway. I needed Rebecca gone. Problem solved. Grandma left me that house to give me something that was mine. I protected it the only way I could and got paid well for my trouble. The demolition crew didn't just tear down a house that day. They cleared away the last bit of obligation I felt toward family members who only showed up when they needed something. The highway runs smooth now. No obstacles, no drama, just a clear path forward. Same as my life these days. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel and help us bring you more and better stories. Thanks.